Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the abundant Jew hatred that is popping up almost everywhere. It's hard not to be deeply troubled by it. Every Saturday morning, my very small synagogue located on the Upper West Side of Manhattan gets a drive-by visit from two uniformed police officers. Some Saturdays, the officers do a walkthrough. They are there to check on us, to make sure we're safe, to ensure that should there be any incident, we know what to do. We, the members of our congregation, would be grateful for their visits on any occasion. All the more so since the massacre perpetrated against us, against Jews, against Israelis on October 7, 2023. And even more so since the election that voted in Zohran Mamdani as the next mayor of our city, the greatest city in the world, the city with the largest Jewish population in the world. The Jews who come to pray in our synagogue are not just Jews, we are Jewish Jews. We stand out. The men wear kippot, even not in synagogue, while most people walking up and down the block are dressed in for jogging or a stroll in the park or to walk their dogs. We are dressed on Saturday morning in what once was called our Sunday's best. Suits and hats are our formal Saturday or Shabbat attire. We are targets. Our prayer room is small, on the ground floor, of a nondescript brownstone. Before October 7th, there was a small sign with Hebrew letters that, in translation, read, House of Study. The tenants who share our building, a co-op, knew from the moment they bought in that we were there. They chose the lower cost, a percentage lower, of their apartments on market value because we were there, accepting the presumed nuisance of having a synagogue as their neighbor, over the cost of a more expensive home elsewhere in Manhattan. On October 7th, their lives changed too. Out of fear, they lobbied, or rather firmly insisted, that we take down the 12 by 12 inch Hebrew sign, arguing that the building is already a target. They wanted to minimize the obvious, to make it less obvious. They were scared that they, too, might be the victims of an attack. I was against the decision to remove the sign. I do not believe one should cower in fear in the face of bullies and haters. I believe that, as Jews, we should be proud. I also believe that we should set up proper defenses and protections in order to protect us and our community. I was overruled. The fear is justified. Immediately following October 7th, as posters with the faces of those Israelis taken hostage by Hamas were hung all over the world. Many of the posters in our neighborhood, a beautiful tree-lined residential oasis in the big city, were defaced, others were ripped down. On the Saturday night following the prayer service signaling the end of Shabbat, two men, members of our congregation, were attacked. As the two, dressed in identifiably Jewish garb, approached the corner, a white Honda Odyssey threw open its side door and shot, pelted them with pellet guns, and sped away. The two victims were rushed to the hospital, and in a story that is making headline news now, a large historic synagogue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan became the target of a loud pro-Hamas rally in the midst of a private evening event. Inside the synagogue was hosting a group of nefesh b'nefesh, which is translated to mean soul to soul. Outside were rowdy, raucous Jew haters, lovers of Hamas, shouting awful slurs. Most egregiously, they shouted that the event was a violation of law. Ironically, they blocked the synagogue's entrance, preventing people from entering, and that's against the law. Their shouts consisted of what have now become the common tirades against Jews, heard across campuses and on street corners. From the river to the sea, from New York to Gaza, globalize the Intifada. And then there were a few variations on those themes. Resistance, you make us proud. Take another settler out. And we need to make them scared. We need to make them scared. We need to make them scared. One of the leaders of the protest is quoted as saying, we need to make them, Jews, think twice before holding events like this. And prior to the eagerly anticipated meeting between Zohran Mamdani and President Trump, the spokesperson for the mayor-elect is quoted as saying, and this is a quote, "These sacred places should not be used to promote activities in violation of international law." Why did they choose this venue? Nefesh B'Nefesh was not founded in response to October 7th. In fact, it was founded 24 years ago. It is an organization that helps Jews move to Israel. And moving to Israel is not a violation of international law. Actually, Israel is one of the few countries in the world that has dual citizenship arrangements with the United States. Moreover, it is a religious obligation for Jews, as clearly articulated by Jewish law, and grounded in dozens of biblical verses, for a Jew to move to Israel, to live in Israel, an obligation that is in many ways akin to the obligation of Muslims visiting the Hajj in Mecca. The inanity, the absurdity, the ignorance propelling this demonstration was inadvertently articulated by the group's spokesperson, who was quoted as saying the event was recruiting Jews to displace Palestinians from their lands. The spokesperson later walked back that statement, qualifying it by saying only those who would move to the West Bank would be violating international law. Excuse me? Who do they think they're fooling? Everyone knows, certainly if you're in the know, if you follow this at all, that these Hamas supporters firmly and wholeheartedly believe that Israel in its entirety is occupied by Jews, and that they, the Jews, in their entirety must be removed. That was the motivation behind the October 7th, 2023 attack. That is their foundation, the foundation of their support for Hamas and their lack of condemnation of the horrific massacre. That's where Mamdani stands, by the way. The hatred is deep. It is visceral. It has been given license to grow now. It is not merely a hatred of Israel. For them, Israel is a metaphor for all Jews. Coming up next, points of view. Both columns today are from the New York Post. First up is a column entitled "Justice Delayed, Hidden Holocaust Archive Must Force an Art World Reckoning." It's authored by Jonathan H. Schwartz. It was published on November 23rd, 2025. The topic is very important. We have dealt with this in the past, but not for some time, because most recently I've been focusing on Jew hatred and the October 7th massacre. This is how Schwartz begins. In 1944, as soldiers herded Hungarian Jews into ghettos and onto cattle cars, another army went to work, clerks with pens and rubber stamps. On typed forms and museum letterhead, they calmly recorded what they were taking. Mukassis, oil on canvas, 18th century German oil, 843 carpets, 4,500 volume library. Those records survived on roughly 2,500 pages of microfilm. Wartime files from the office of Dr. Denys Sansky, Hungary's government minister for Jewish art assets, and preserved by Holocaust scholar Randolph L. Bram. For decades, those reels were hard to access and easy to ignore. This year, with our urging, the World Jewish Restitution Organization funded the work to put the scans online. Schwartz now explains what he and his team did with the information. He posted it for families so that they should know and hopefully be able to reclaim their family's art. But the museums are the problem, not just finding it. Schwartz continues, "My team at the Holocaust Art Recovery Initiative has spent months going through every page and posting the results on the 470 plus post series on X, complete with names, addresses, artists, dimensions, crate numbers, and museum intake notes. And our research lands just as Washington is forcing the art world to examine its culpability in Nazi-looted art. This month, the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously advanced the bipartisan bill to strengthen the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act. That's known as HERE, by the way, and removed its built-in sunset at the end of 2026. The original HERE Act passed in 2016 and was supposed to ensure the Holocaust-era art cases are decided on merits, not thrown out due to technical time limits. The new bill acknowledges that the job is not done and that time is running out. Schwartz now gives a short list of examples that will send shivers up your spine. He continues, meanwhile, museums and collectors are facing a fresh wave of Nazi loot stories. An Italian old master portrait spotted in a real estate listing in Argentina. Egon Schiele's drawings and Claude Monet's oils returned to descendants with the help of the Manhattan prosecutor's office. A Van Gogh, sold by Metropolitan Museum of Art under a legal cloud. Every few weeks, another one-painting headline, and the Hungarian microfilms are the equivalent of thousands of those headlines at once. Schwartz and his team prove beyond a doubt who holds the provenance and that the art was stolen. There's no question about it. He writes, they show, in the state's own handwriting and typeface, how Jewish collections were stripped and rerouted into public institutions that still exist. One file records how the state split the contents of Baroness Hatvani Deutsch's home at Landshut Utka 6 into two streams, weapons and Habsburg's imperial portraits to the War Museum in Buda, the castle there, art collection to the Museum of Fine Arts. One address, one victim, two national museums. Another file catalogs the collection of widow Aldrane Kasba, including a Jacob Jourdain's, Philmon Passis, a Grenache, Last Supper, and more, plus Mason's clocks and Galet's glass. The best pieces went to the Museum of Fine Arts or the Hop Museum of East Asian Art, the rest into the finance and auction system. A Strauss family file lists paintings of Delacroix, Gros, Courbet, and others. Strauss pictures recorded at the Museum of Fine Arts with dates, dimensions, and signatures. It is shocking to me. The evidence is so clear, and for decades, people said there was no evidence. It is now undeniable. Schwartz writes, in Baja, the City Museum director compiled inventories of more than 1,000 artworks and valuables from named Jewish homes and proposed keeping them all as state deposits. In Nagravad, officials logged more than 1,500 artworks and thousands of books from Jewish palaces and apartments. In Pest, a certified report traces the chain of custody as property moved from the ghetto into the municipal museum, carpets sliding down from balconies, statues carried upright, glass flagged as fragile. This is not rumor, memoir, or hindsight. It is the state's own paperwork. Names of Jewish families and addresses, artists, dimensions, crates, numbers, rail routes, even fuel vouchers, and the license plate of the commissioner's Plymouth. These reels turn moral outrage into hard evidence. They show not just that Jewish collections were robbed, but where the objects went, who signed for them, and which institution received them. They undercut every abandoned property excuse and every provenance that conveniently begins in 1950. Any museum hanging a Hungarian painting with a helpful chain of ownership gap between 1938 and 1948, any collector who bought a Central European private collection at a New York State sale, or any auction house happy to list items acquired in Europe after the war is now on notice. This archive is a time bomb under your wall labels. Schwartz concludes saying, it is all in black and white, recorded by them, not memory or guessing, real evidence. He writes, the HERE Act was written to give heirs a fair day in court. The new HERE bill is meant to keep that promise alive beyond 2026. But no statute can work if museums and market players avert their eyes from the best evidence we have. Hungary's microfilms sat in the library archives for decades. Now they're online, translated, indexed, and impossible to unsee. Congress is moving, courts are ruling, major museums are back under scrutiny. The excuses just ran out. This is an excellent column by Schwartz. He shows us the proof. Now we must insist on the justice and the rightful return of the art. Next up is an editorial from the New York Post, and it's entitled Jewish Organizations Enabled Mamdani, American Dream on Hold and Other Commentary, authored by the Post's editorial board. Actually, it was published on November 19th, and it's subtitled Defamation Beat, Jewish Orgs Enabled Mamdani. This is a compilation of comments that the New York Post collected that prove their point, the point of the editors. Here's the first piece. The Anti-Defamation League and other well-heeled Jewish groups did almost nothing to prevent the rise of the man with Mamdani's views, fumes Lyle Leibovitz of the City Journal. Indeed, Jewish groups have been inexcusable failures at stifling the rise of politicians who pose a threat to the Jewish community's interest. The ADL, under Jonathan Greenblatt, transformed into an amplifier of the Democratic Party messaging and worked assiduously to disseminate the idea that the right was primarily responsible for anti-Semitism in America. Ugh. The ADL's counterproductive rhetoric elevated critical race theory and other left-wing frameworks that considered Jews privileged aggressors. Moreover, its attempts at education have done nothing but make people more anti-Semitic. In other words, these organizations set the groundwork for Mamdani's rise, and were powerless to stop the Jew hatred, which is inextricably bound to that, once the momentum was building. The New York Post gives several other examples, but they are all in the same vein. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons and memes today. This first is a meme. It's very funny. It was actually part 2 of one that we saw last week. And it makes fun of Trump's visit to McDonald's during the campaign. He's in the drive-in room window and he asks, "Would you like world peace with that?" These successes drive Trump haters batty. This next one is a classic. A screamer is shouting, "Free Palestine," and Trump responds, "Just did," and the screamer then shouts, "No." Next up is the dilemma for liberal activists. 2 choices. Condemn Hamas for executing Gazan civilians, or stay silent because they cannot blame Israel. An interesting dilemma indeed. This fourth cartoon is a cartoon of 4 panels. Person number 1 and person number 2. So person number 1 says, "I am mad about the war in Gaza." Person number 2 says, "Here's a peace deal." Person number 1 responds, "I don't want a peace deal." So the fourth panel repeats, "I want to be mad." This is a repeated theme, and the need to stay mad, especially at Trump, even when he seems to be accomplishing some really positive things. This fifth cartoon is about the Me Too movement, the women's movement. In this case, Israel, in the form of a woman, comes before the UN, United Nations International Women's Organization, for help because of October 7th and the rapes and the murders and the brutal issues. They found their ears, mouth, and eyes covered. They hear, speak, and see no evil when it comes to Jews. The sixth cartoon pokes fun at Trump meeting with the Saudi crown prince. It's very clear that the Saudis captured, tortured, murdered, and then dismembered the journalist Khashoggi. But that means nothing to Trump. He greets the prince with a red carpet. But the carpet is blood, and at the end of the carpet is Khashoggi's body. As finally, this last cartoon has the Saudi crown prince again saying Trump is the best president money can buy, as Trump sells him the most advanced fighter jets that the US has, the F-35, as well as a bone cruncher material. These last two were very funny and very true. The US seems to be turning a blind eye to the Saudis' egregious, brutal, and illegal operations that even involved a US citizen. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. A Houthi-controlled court in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, has sentenced 17 defendants to public execution by firing squad for spying for British, American, and Israeli enemies. The verdict was issued in less than 2 weeks amid accusations that the proper judicial proceedings were not followed. The court also sentenced 2 defendants to prison terms ranging from 3 to 10 years and acquitted 2. The office of the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, addressed the strikes in Gaza. The office stated that, quote, Hamas once again violated the ceasefire and sent a terrorist toward the area under Israeli control to attack IDF soldiers. In response, Israel eliminated 5 senior Hamas terrorists. The statement was published on Netanyahu's official X account in English. This has been a near daily ritual. Palestinians reported a group of settlers had poisoned a herd of sheep in the village of Al-Muwayyir, near Ramallah. According to the report, they entered the area and poisoned the herd belonging to the Palestinian, which resulted in the death of 3 sheep. An investigation is underway. Counterterrorism unit fighters eliminated a terrorist in the village of Tel, near Nablus, who shot and moderately wounded an IDF soldier. The terrorist was an officer in the Palestinian police Givati reconnaissance unit. Fighters in the area arrested another operative in the Palestinian security apparatus suspected of assisting him. In addition, there were operations by security forces in Samaria. Other terrorists active in the Palestinian security apparatus were also arrested. One by the Duvdavan unit near the village of Borkin in Jenin, and the second by the counter-terrorism unit in the Al-Farah refugee camp. The head of the operations division during October 7th, 2023, the massacre, whose name was Major General Oded Bastiuk, has been dismissed from the reserve service in the IDF. This follows the IDF's Chief of Staff's decision on personnel conclusions and command measures in the wake of the military's failure during the Hamas attack. Former military intelligence chief Aaron Haliva and former unit of 8,200 Shmona Commander Yossi Sariel did not attend the Chief of Staff's summons due to scheduling conflicts, they said. The former commanders were called to meetings following the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi's decision on personnel conclusions and command measures in the wake of the military's failure before and during Hamas attack on October 7, 2023. Heads are finally beginning to roll. And finally, on a positive note, Israel is beginning the process of airlifting all the remaining B'nai Menashe community from India to Israel. 1,200 will be brought from India by the end of 2026. That will close a long chapter of Indian Jewish history. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. This is an unbelievable story. It's a story which is truly inspirational, and it is true. No coincidences. A Sefer Torah at the perfect moment. Uri Schechter writes, last week a friend from my reserve unit called. He lives on a secular kibbutz in the Sharon and recently took charge of the small synagogue there. Excited, he told me this story. You won't believe it. There's a real awakening. People who haven't prayed in years are coming back. Almost every Shabbat, we have a full minyan. But then he added a problem. The Torah scrolls here are falling apart. One broken, one torn, probably not kosher. Do you know anyone who can help? I told him, call Shlomo Ra'anan from Ayelet HaShachar. This is exactly what he does. He called him, and minutes later, phoned me back amazed. What an incredible man. He's already on it. Half an hour later, he called again, crying. Shlomo asked me one question. Did someone from your kibbutz fall in the war? I told him yes, a young officer from the community. Shlomo said, I have a brand new Sefer Torah. The donor wants it to be dedicated to a fallen soldier. Ask the family if they'll agree. My friend called the father after speaking with his wife. The father said yes, and added something unbelievable. When our synagogue first opened, it was the Shabbat of our son's bar mitzvah, Parshat Vayera. He was the first person called up to the Torah here, and this week, on the same Parsha, is the anniversary of his death. And now, on the same Shabbat, in the same place, a new Sefer Torah will be brought in his memory. I stood speechless. A fallen soldier, a kibbutz rediscovering prayer, a Sefer Torah arriving at the exact moment it was meant to. Divine precision, no mistakes. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.